What does a leading futurist think about the state of the future? Welcome to Business Without Barriers, the show bringing you relevant strategies to thrive and succeed in a volatile world, and the show turning barriers into bridges by bringing humanity back to business. I'm your host, Carmen Wilde, and opening up his successful today is Jerome Glenn. Jerome is the co-founder and CEO of the Millennium Project, focusing on global futures research, and is the lead author of 19 State of the Future reports. He has over 40 years of futures research experience and has addressed or keynoted over 300 conferences around the world, published over 100 futures-oriented articles, and is the author of Future Mind, Linking the Future, and the co-author of Space Trek, The Endless Migration. Jerome invented the futures wheel and numerous futures concepts, and Saturday Review named him among the most unusually gifted leaders of America for his pioneering work in tropical medicine, future-oriented education, and participatory decision-making systems in 1974. He was instrumental in naming the first Space Shuttle, the Enterprise, and banning the first space weapon. And he's a leading boomerang stuntman. A warm welcome to the show, Glenn.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I'm so curious. A leading boomerang stuntman? Tell me more about that.
Well, there was this really attractive lady, and she had some boomerangs over her door. I said, what the hell's going on here? And she had been was at the time, the organizer for the International Boomerang Tournament that was held each year at the Smithsonian or by the Smithsonian Institution near the Lincoln Memorial space. So I guess I had to learn how to throw boomerangs. And then I started getting, and because the scholar of boomerangs, believe it or not, there's a scholar of boomerangs, and he's not Australian, he's an American, who was working at the archives. People would send him these hotshot boomerangs from around the world. They competed, by the way, from South Africa, all over the place. And so I got to test out a lot of the good boomerangs. So I ended up doing stunts. And the stunt that I ended up with was knocking a small boomerang out of my teeth. I throw it out and knocked it out. No one has duplicated that one yet.
Fantastic. How totally different.
Well, I gave a talk at Google headquarters, and the guy who introduced me says, well, I don't know what boomerangs have to do with futures research, but at least he knows how to predict where it's going to come back to it.
I love that.
So he had that point. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then I must ask you, this story about banning the first space weapon, that must be a good story.
Yeah. Oh my. I wrote a book with a guy named George Robinson, who got the first PhD in space law. We called the book Space Trek, The Endless Migration. And in the process, George says, you got to write a chapter on the whole military situation. I said, oh, well, I don't want to do that. But anyway, I ended up doing it. So I researched all these various issues. And I went, holy moly, this idea of a weapon in orbit, if you turn it off, you don't know where it is. So it's supposed to be a fractional, but it can continue on. It means that the time that you have from a detection to it hitting you is much shorter than if it's shooting across the North Pole or the South Pole. People didn't think about that so much. Or the South Pole. You know, by the way, think about that. We had all this stuff over Canada, defense, NORAD, all that. Well, if I'm running operations in Russia, I'll send it over the South Pole or around by Mexico or somewhere else. Anyway, and that looked like a real serious problem. So I, actually, in the process of writing the book, I interviewed a 4-star admiral who was in charge of space military stuff at the Pentagon. And I said, what's your position on FOBs? So we started fractional orbital bombardment system. And we started talking about it. And then some time later, I get a letter that says, FOBs are now in the SALT II agreement. I said, well, son of a gun. So I didn't do it directly, but I sort of like pushed it into the arena of discussion a bit.
Sure. I bet we could speak for weeks on the number of interesting stories you have over
Good,
the years.
let's do it.
That would be interesting. How much can we fit into 1 hour? So tell me how you got into the future space. Where did that all start for you?
Well, I was working on my master's degree. I thought I was going to be a teacher of social studies in high school. So I was working on my master's degree, and I got this invitation from the state of Vermont in the United States saying, would you go to a ski lodge for 3 days to work on the future of the state of Vermont? Well, I was a poor graduate student, and a ski lodge, this is like a big, this is like Valhalla to the Vermont. This is, of course, what do I got to do? Just show up and eat, and ski? Sure. And so this little commission they put together had like one teacher, and I was the one graduate student. And we met about every 2 weeks for 3 days. And I had to learn the methodology of futures research and read this stuff. And I got a box of Xeroxes by people who I'd never heard about at the time: Herman Kahn, Bucky Fuller, Alvin Toffler. I'm reading through this stuff in 3 hours. I'm not making this. 3 hours later, I finally got up out of my chair. It was riveting stuff. This is the most interesting stuff I ever read. So in the process of doing all that, it dawned on me that futures research methodologies are simply a way of packaging a lot of diverse information to make an intelligent decision. Well, I thought that education ought to be something about that too. So I took the methods of the futurists and turned them into teaching techniques. And that took off around the United States. So I went running around giving talks. So one thing led to the next after that. So that's how I got into it.
Sure.
Skiing and boomerangs. That's the secret.
That's incredible. So it's almost by accident, but
Yeah.
Nothing's by accident. Nothing's coincidence. You were sent there for a reason. And
so you believe the universe is ordained, do you? Aha.
Do you, Jerome?
I don't know enough to know that.
You haven't done enough information.
I haven't done enough
on
futures research
on that.
Yeah. What are the alternative futures for the universe? I haven't had that contract yet.
Okay. Let's stick to the futures on Earth. So you started the Millennium Project with the purpose to improve humanity's prospects for building a better future. Right. Tell us about some of the activities that enable you to do this.
Right. One is we've set up what we call nodes around the world. Our definition, our use of the word node, like an information theory, a node is the intersection of two or more networks. So a node intersects the networks of future-oriented people in government, business, academia, UN related stuff, so that when we send out a question to these 67 nodes around the world, they then, like in South Africa, we have a node in South Africa, they then will find out who knows the most about this issue. I won't know who's the leaders in each of these countries, but the nodes will. But by having a different kind of people, the business people pick the best business people, obviously. Government people pick the best government people, obviously. The academics pick the best. So this is a global way to collect the best thinking, within reason, the best thinking around the world, put it together, and then send it back to each of these nodes. Then they translate in languages and they put it there, and then there's a response. So the nodes around the world are like input, output, or like global. You hear this phrase, global, local. This is our management answer to that idea. So we have global, local research going back and forth for all these years. And we produce books, and we produce methods, and we produce conferences. And we just finished a 24-hour around the world conversation, March 1st. March 1st is Future Day, World Future Day. And so we start in New Zealand, and every hour it moves the next time zone around the world. And then so we end up back in Hawaii or somewhere like that. So it's a way of sort of having friendly conversation among complete strangers, by the way.
Okay.
So it's transnational, intercultural, interinstitutional, and strangers talking about how to improve the future. That's once a year. But most of what we do is research about possibilities of the future. We've done 56 research studies.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Sure. So you have this incredible repository of information and access to so many different people in all countries. Well, so many different countries. How many countries are, is it? Okay. So it's,
well, it's 67. Global. Well, yeah.
67 nodes. Okay.
A person, yeah, but a person can participate in our work, even if there's not a node in the country, because we have a website and we have the research going on. So if they're smart enough to figure out how to get in the door, they're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. So if you put all this to, knowing what you know over decades now already, I'd love to know from you what scares you most about the future right now.
Do I have to tell you? I mean, these are scary things.
Yeah. Let's get real.
All right, I'll give you one that's way off in the future. 500 years, not too far. The magnetic poles, there's a magnetic field, right, that protects us from this extra radiation from the sun. Some of it gets through, but most of it goes around us and passes on. If that stuff came through, we're toast. We're just gone, you know? So we need this magnetic protection. Well, every so often, they get weak and then they switch. Then they get strong again. That's okay. We can survive that. What we can't survive is it through time. There's only one study so far. So we don't know, how good. But it showed that the magnetic strength over millennia is slowly decreasing. So he projected that out with different assumptions. And one assumption showed 500 years from now, we won't have enough magnetic containment to protect us from the extra solar radiation.
Sure.
So we either migrate into space, or we live under the ocean, or in the ground, or something like that, or we ask the sun to behave itself. So that's one. A nearer term one, and this is pretty nasty. As technology gets more powerful and simpler to use, that means eventually an individual acting alone might be able to make and deploy a weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Well, it's CMAT, single individually massively destructive. 3 ways to prevent that. 1, technical means, that's classified, not our business. And that'll reduce most of it. The second is mental health. You got to be crazy if you want to knock out the human species. I mean, that's a pretty legitimate definition of being insane. All right. So we're learning a lot about the brain. We're learning a lot about behavior. We're learning a lot about mental health. And so but we don't always pull all that together and integrate it into how a children develops in the family, in the school, in the church, or whatever. We need to apply this stuff. So, I mean, we should be doing it anyway, because we want our children to grow up nice. All right. And so that's another part of it. That doesn't solve the problem, but reduces the number of crazies. And the third one is one that we would actually like to study. Haven't done it yet, would like to. And that is, what's the role of the public in preventing this? The family, the community, whatever, the public. In the Cold War, the public had no role. And they paid taxes, but that was about it. They had no way to act to prevent World War III, really. But on this one, they do, because this is where it's the individual in the family that evolves into such a crazy person. So all of us, so that's one reason the Millennium Project would like to do this, because if Mauritania and Mauritius, yes, Mauritius, and all the rest of the M countries, Moldova, Montenegro, Malta. I'm covering up here, Malta, etc. If all those countries do it right, but one country doesn't, we're still in trouble. So this has to be a human response. The species has to take this seriously. And this is one of the few times, I mean, that the pandemic has taught us we're in the boat together, right? But we'll survive. I mean, that's not as a threat that wipes us out, just gives us difficulty. But this one can wipe us out. So that's a serious one to take care of. Another one, which we are beginning to work on a little bit now, is there's been a lot of talk about artificial intelligence being, you hear the stuff from Steve Jobs and oh my God, this will be the last thing we invented. Okay, a lot of confusion around this. Make it simple. There are three kinds of artificial intelligence. Narrow is what we have today. That's not necessarily a big deal. You can forecast unemployment of truck drivers because we're not going to have robot trucks in one day. They get phased in, and so you can retrain, so you can prepare for it. It's a problem, but it's a reasonable problem you can solve. All right. The second one we don't have yet. Is called artificial general intelligence. That's a little bit like us, not in the same way. It's like a bird flies, an airplane flies. They both fly, but they're not the same. Same thing with this. It'll reason like a human in the sense of saying, I don't know what to do about this. So you call up friends, robot calls, or it checks sensor networks, or it goes through other auto systems. But it can go around the whole globe and learn. It's general, So it's a bigger deal, which means the unemployment hit is a much bigger deal. And it happens fast together. Now, that's a problem, but it's not the big problem. Big problem is artificial general intelligence, the third one, or the second one is artificial general. But this one, when it sets its own goals, goes into super intelligence, independent of us. That's what science fiction is warning about. Now, that's way off in the future. However, the reason people are panicking now is because to go from narrow, like we have today, to general, might be as soon as, say, 10 to 15 years. Might be longer, but futurists have got to look at alternative futures, and that's a possibility. It could be that soon. Well, if it's possibly that soon, then how are we going to manage the transition? Because if we don't get the initial conditions, if we don't get the initial conditions going into general intelligence, then as general intelligence evolves into super, it'll be way beyond, it's not necessarily in our interest. All right. So we have to make this transition between narrow and general. This is what we can act on. And that could happen as fast as 10 to 15 years. But to make an international agreement will probably take 10 to 15 years. I mean, this is more complex than atomic energy management.
Sure.
This is more complex actually than climate change. This is really complex stuff. And so I figure it's going to take at least 10 years to get, you got to get agreements, you got to create a system, then you have to have management. It has to be real. You have to have enforcement capabilities on a global basis. Because once again, if organized crime works this out in country X, it can do a bunch of nonsense and then evolve out of control because they don't have necessarily good futurists, and it goes out of control, and we can become toast later on. So those are some things to worry about.
Those are flippin' scary. Do we have the general conditions? Do we even know what those general conditions are to go from your narrow to your general? Good.
No, in my judgment, no. Because how artificial general intelligence, there's different approaches to doing this. I mean, if you go back to World War II, when the guy broke the code in the UK, was one guy that had all these brilliant geniuses working and they weren't getting it. This one guy figures out how to, well, this is the situation with generals, even much more than that. There's many ways it can evolve. So what is it that you're managing? Now, if AI narrow learns to learn and get better and better and better and better, that's going into general. So it might be able to get around the management when it goes into general. This is Star Trek, Star Trek television series. They shoot little fate or whatever it is, and the opposition modulates its stuff. So after a couple of shots, it can defend itself. Well, general might be able to do that as it goes into super. We don't know. We have to think together. This is a complex study. That's why we want to do it, a global study. I want to have the Chinese involved. I want to have the Russians involved. I want to have the European Union involved. I want to have as many people of different categories involved, because we as a species have to solve this problem. Because even during the Cold War, when we had nuclear weapons, they were classified, but the Soviet Union and the United States did come to agreements. SALT II, and that's one of the ones that you pointed out, because we came to agreements. We managed the situation. We did not have World War III. back in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, if I asked people, do you think we're going to have World War III? Most of the hands would go up. Most people thought we were not going to be alive today back then. Well, we figured it out. Now, granted, it's simpler, but we're going to have to do the same thing again, except this time it has to be not just Moscow and Washington, it has to be all of us. All of us.
We've got your back in handling that study.
Okay, good. I need to get some fundraising. We haven't been funded to do this yet. We're out there looking.
Okay. I'll talk to my people and get them to talk to your people.
Right. Aha, very good. Very good. All right.
So, Jerome, same way that things scare you, there's got to be a lot of things that excite you.
Oh, yeah.
Lift our spirits. Tell us what's exciting about the future.
Well, it's the other side of that coin. I mean, we're in a process of making civilization able to run itself in the same way that our autonomic nervous system back here runs our digestion and heartbeat. I mean, imagine how complex your body is, really.
Yeah.
It's exceedingly complex. The more we look at the body, the more we find out how really complex it really is. Amazing it works. And the whole thing works without us even saying, turn on the heart, turn off the heart, turn on. We don't do that. We're free to think like we are doing right now. So all the stuff happening in your body, all the stuff happening in my body, is happening without our involvement at all, so that we're free to create the future. Right? So we're doing that for the whole narrow intelligence. You know, we're basically making an autonomic nervous system to run the basics of civilization that then will free us up to not do repetitive work anymore. I mean, a heartbeat's a repetitive job. Let's face it. No. And this transition, well, that's exciting. Now, general intelligence, if it does occur by, say, 2030, 2035, and if that means there's a whole bunch of new income sources from synthetic biology, 3D printing, quantum computing, all these sort of new things coming up will be new income sources. So we may have new income sources like that. And some of those things will make stuff cheaper. Like, for example, AI that diagnoses cancer is better than a doctor right now. So you don't have to pay a doctor to do it. It doesn't cost as much, because the next time you run the program, you don't have to rewrite the program. It's already there. It's already been paid for. So a lot of the stuff that we have today will start to come down in cost. Right now, the standard of living is still going up, but it'll start to bell curve. We think that bell curve coming down the cost of living, will come down around that same time, which means what you have to pay a citizen, because if general intelligence comes in and knocks out all these conventional jobs, then you would pay the citizen a basic living. Because the social contract is, if you go to school, do okay, then you get a job and do okay, then we give you retirement if you do okay. That's the social contract. Well, we won't be able to do that social contract if general intelligence hits. That means too many people will be unemployed too fast. It'll be, say, social chaos. So, so we may need to have a basic thing to say, okay, you went to school, you did okay in the job, you know, you're a good person, and you got wiped out, not your fault at all. So we're going to give you a basic thing. You know, you're not making much money. You'll still want to make up more money, but just enough that you're not thrown in the streets, right? That means we can have a self-actualizing economy. In other words, you can make a living out of your evolution of yourself. Like, I get the hunch that you probably like what you're doing at this moment. Right? But a lot of people don't. A lot of people are in a job they really don't like, you know? But if they were free to explore what they'd like to do, imagine a world in 2050 of a workforce of about 6 billion people. There'll be more people, but not everybody in the workforce. And imagine maybe half of those people be able to figure out how to make a living out of being what they really want to do. Think of the happiness quotient of the world, so to speak. Furthermore, there's a whole lot of social causes that people would like to get involved in. So they maybe send a check in, but they don't do anything themselves. So imagine if more people can say, like, well, I want to do X. Well, nobody's stopping you. Right now, you write with this study with AI, you write a proposal. If it gets turned down, we don't do it, But if you had guaranteed incomes, well, just do it. What's that slogan? Just do it, right? So we could have more humans free to develop. And if more humans are free to develop and create, then civilization, and then we had this autonomic nervous system running everything. So just as the analogy of a human being, as we have a brain that is free to think, hopefully, and we have this autonomic nervous system running the system. Imagine the same thing for civilization as a whole. We're building the autonomic nervous system to free the mind of the human to create the next big deal. That's a little exciting.
So I'm trying to think what the audience would ask you right now. And my guess is, okay, Jerome, that sounds pretty cool. But how on earth is it going to be equitable in terms of how is this basic income going to be agreed on?
Right. Well, right. Namibia does some studies on this, by the way. So did a couple of other African countries. Canada's done some studies. India's done some studies. Brazil's done some studies. Finland did a recent one as well. And what we're finding out is a couple of things. One, most people do not rip off the system. Most people get their basic income and they do something useful with it. Because people really don't want to be bored. they really, there's always idiots that'll sit back with a six-pack and drink forever and they're dead. But that's not most of the people. We shouldn't run civilization based upon a small minority of idiots. Okay, so that's one part. The second part is that, and I think Switzerland worked this out the best, because they have a bill in there to do this. About a third of the country voted yes, so they didn't do it. They may get up there sometime beyond 50%. But the idea is you give a basic living, just enough that people are not thrown in the streets. But everybody gets that, right? Now, the people who make a lot more than that are paying back taxes. So in a sense, they're giving it back, right? So the easy way to get around is a reason for this giving it to everybody. One is to address your question: is how do you make it equitable? That's how you give it to everybody. The second one is you get rid of the social stigma and stereotype of welfare. See, because who gets welfare? The people who, quote, didn't make it in life. So you're getting it in your, I'm a loser, I'm a loser, I'm a loser. And then that's self-perpetuating. I'm a loser. Well, if I'm a loser, I guess I'm a loser. So it just eats upon itself, and it festers in society. It's really bad. But if everybody's getting it, well, I got very bad. What are you doing with yours? Well, I'm doing this. Well, what are you doing with yours? Well, what's going on? That's a completely different reaction than, oh my God, I'm a loser. So that's how you handle the equity part.
Does this eradicate poverty then?
Yeah, extreme poverty. I mean, you'll still be like at the edge, so to speak, but you're not over the edge. Yeah, so you're not getting that much. You're getting enough, the basic, and so it will get rid of extreme poverty. By the way, a lot of people don't know this, but if you take a look at the extreme poverty, the trends over time, when the UN said 2030, that was not crazy. That was a trend curve. In 1980, half the world was in extreme poverty, and they had a couple billion fewer people. Today, less than 10% is in extreme poverty. So you project that out, yeah, you'll still have some people, but I mean, basically it's gone. So the idea that we'll always have the poor with us, well, we'll have poor, but maybe not extreme poverty. Yeah.
So it's a really, we could spend hours just speaking about this, because this is fascinating. This whole idea of a self-actualized economy is really fascinating, that we could actually move towards that, how it would change the face of humanity and the condition of humanity is mind-blowing. Yeah. And yes, you'll have your critics and your naysayers that will poke holes into something like that. Yet you can look at the complete opposite. Like you say, having time to think, not worried about basic needs, can really change things for us. So it's in your future work technology report that you have these three scenarios where you've got it's complicated, it's a mixed bag in terms of what the future work looks like. It's either complete flip and despair, or it's this self-actualized economy. What needs to happen for us to make a self-actualized economy happen?
Yes. Okay.
And the best part of it, actually.
In the report, the second half of the report has 90, almost 100 actions that have been internationally assessed. Every single one of them has been assessed. You know, if you do it this way, it won't work. You do it this way, it'll work. Here's what you got to pay attention to about that action. So it doesn't simply say do X. It says if you do X, here's what you got to consider. So each one gets about a page. So that's about 100 pages of what to do. Now, in all of that, you'd say, well, what are some of the high impact? Because obviously some actions have more impact than others. One is, my own view, is the art world. Music, television, movies, theater, dance, all of that stuff. I mean, if you look back 1,000 years, what do you see? You see art, right? Writing, poetry. We have a world culture that says that your value, as an average, is determined by your job, right? We even pay you money for that value. And your value is determined by your boss. Your boss says you're hired as an economist, right? So what happens if you're fired? You have no more value. Well, that makes people drink, you know, take the opioids or whatever the heck it is. You know, that's a bad future if everybody loses their identity. So how do you make a transition in a culture that says your value is determined by your job, as a generalization, and your value is what you do with your own freedom? That's a tremendous gap. And the way you change culture is through the arts. An example in my country, back in the late 60s, early 70s, we had this freedom of thought, or whatever you want to call it, opening up civil rights, and all kinds of different social movements occurred. You trace it back. Where did it come from? Was it people reading articles or listening to music? Music, right. So the music writers were the instigators. People would sing these songs, and they'd hold hands and says, you know, put a flower in somebody's hair. Isn't that cool? Yeah. All right. Well, we've got to start to sit down with the art community across the board, entire art community, and say, you know, you guys think you're doing something good. I want to tell you now, you got to do something that's actually strategically important, because that change of mind of the world, really difficult. Now, we're in the process of having a global timeout with a pandemic. You know, most parents, when their kids misbehave, you say, sit down, time out, be quiet, and think about what you did wrong. All right. Well, the whole human species is in for the first time together. Doesn't matter whether you're in the Middle East or in Alaska, you have a timeout. So conversations around the world are happening on rethinking. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's enough to make the change I'm talking about, but it begins the process a little bit. And then the arts have got to take it on more. So I would say that there's, as I said, there's like 100 things that ought to be done. But one of the most strategic ones is to work with the art community to say, how do I move from identity of a job defined by a boss to being so courageous that I can set my own identity? I mean, most people figure, like, if you don't have a job, you're naked to the world. You know, my security blanket is my job. And you're going to take off that security blanket? That's a very insecure position. So we got to say, hey, I took off the blanket and oh my God, I went through a little chaotic thing, but it finally, you can just put a little rap music to it. But that's what we got to do. We have to change a job oriented culture. There'll still be jobs, by the way. By 2050, in the scenarios, we show that maybe about 1 billion, which is not small, 1 billion people still having jobs in the sense that they have a boss and a salary, in that sense. Maybe half the people of the world, would be 3 billion, are in self-actualization. Maybe another 1 billion or more are still in the informal. It's really hard to get rid of the informal economy because a lot of people don't want to get out. They're afraid to get out of the informal economy because then the government will ask them to pay taxes. Yeah, but if you grow your business, you'll make more money. But anyway, they don't think that way, and it's a closed system. It's hard to break that up, and there'll always be people in transition of one sort or another. But the arts.
You've brought on, this is a really interesting one out of the 100 that you've picked on here, because self-value becomes so critical then to the future of our species.
Absolutely.
And re-identifying ourselves not on the things that we own, whatever is outside of us, but really true passion, purpose, what value is within. I mean, that is actually but the biggest part of my coaching role is helping people identify with self-value. And exactly. And
ladies and gentlemen, she is not paying me a check for this.
And I actually wrote a little poem the other day. I must send it to you, where I spoke about, appreciation. So what I've even forgotten my own title. Appreciation appreciates. So when you actually appreciate yourself, there's an appreciation. It's like a exponential appreciation. But it's not so easy. The self-value thing. There's a big.
It's really tough.
Yeah,
because you got the momentum of the entire world's culture is going the other direction.
Exactly. Then there's the other thing about the arts, which you've now touched on. If that's going to be so important in terms of our music, we're going to have to drive the narrative, because we've got amazing music. And listen to what I cringe sometimes when I hear what my nephew is listening to and how that may be influencing. So the narrative of humanity needs to almost change. And so the value and the narrative.
Yes. Nothing less.
Tell us then, if we were to organize ourselves somehow, because I skimmed through the executive reports of all your 3 major reports, or the executive summaries, and the common denominator in all this in terms of a solution is cohesion, collaboration, global ethics. How do we get that right?
Well, we're moving in that direction. After World War II, when you have when nature has a disaster, forest fire, whatever, you get new growth. All right. Same thing. After World War II, it didn't affect everybody in the world, but a lot of the world was affected by World War II. What did we get out of it? Multilateralism, the UN, the World Bank, IMF, collaboration, and the former enemy of the United States, Germany, and Japan are now the leading allies of the United States at the moment, because we helped and collaborated on rebuilding and so forth. You didn't have much of that after World War I and before. The idea of people helping each other, complete strangers, I think is what's the majority of what's happening as we speak this moment. Because, the news is, the job in a sense is to tell you what's the most horrible thing humans did today. But you don't get around to like, most of it's working. It's just like in our body, most of it's working. But if we walk down a street and hit our toe, it hurts. That's what we notice. We don't notice the digestive system. We don't notice, so it's understandable that we do that. I just got lost in the autonomic nervous system. Got to help me out here.
Well, I was talking about how do we actually get to this collaboration in global ethics, and you're saying, well, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. Like, for example, out of the pandemic, with this first global rethink, something will come out of it. Will it be more collaboration? I would assume so, because it reinforces very clearly that we're all in the boat together. In World War II, Switzerland and some other countries says, "Hey, leave me out of this." you know? But you can't say, leave me out of this with the pandemic, right? So this is the first time that that humanity as a whole has been slapped in the face to say we are humanity as a whole. Mm. You had religions saying that, but they said, but my religion is right and yours is wrong. So we don't really have as much collaboration as religion as we ought to. But some stuff will come out of this, I'm sure. I mean, if by analogy, every time there's been a disaster, something new happens. In people's lives, the same thing. They have a disaster, they can get worse and end up dead, or they can say, oh, I'm going to change my life to somewhat. So I think that is a trend direction, that it has an occasional spurt, like the pandemic will be, like World War II was, like the Depression was, and so forth. So we get these little jabs every so often, but that's the direction, it seems to me. And also we have it easier because you know, after World War II, we didn't have the internet. How are you going to collaborate? This conversation could not have occurred a few years ago. And now you think, well, it's no big deal. And guess what? It doesn't even cost anything. It's free of charge on the internet. I mean, it's outrageous.
Tell me what business's role is in shaping our future and how important it is for business to collaborate with governments, etc.
Yeah. Well, in the second half of the work technology report, it had those 100 or 95, 100 actions. They're divided into 5 groups. One group was for the arts and culture. One was for government, what government does. One was what education and academics do. And one was science and technology group, what do they do? And then also, what does business do? Now, I haven't memorized all the actions, but for example, one of the things that business can do and do fast is help people to create what we call AI avatars. An AI avatar, artificial intelligence, this is narrow intelligence avatar. To some degree, you're slowly creating them with these social media because it knows your tastes and so forth. Well, imagine having your own personal avatar, your own personal one that you learn from, and it learns from you, and you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So then it eventually starts to go running around. When it gets good enough, you can go running around the internet while you're sound asleep, picking up all those activities that you want to do, and then dividing them into 2 groups. One group, you'll get some income, and the other group, it's just cool to do it. So it wakes you up in the morning and say, by the way, I've found 75,000 things for you to do, but based upon your profile and your previous feedback, I've divided them into 2 groups, 15 here and 15 there. Here are 15 things you'd like to do. Somebody wants to talk about how to do a television interview, and they're going to pay you $10 for it, but they got 15 people to sign up for that lesson. Boom. And you click here in your account, you get it, etc. And then, you get the idea. So AI avatar will be important for the transition because people don't know how to find markets for themselves around the world. I mean, a little bit of stuff, but I mean, it's a little bit of stuff. It doesn't even count much, done much to the GDP, I'll tell you. But if you have an artificial intelligence doing it for you and going through all kinds of stuff around the world, and then you can also say, hey, I want to do X, I'll pay $10 for that. Right? Well, right now you have like computer dating, but there's still humans doing it. Right? So imagine just like you have computer dating thing, imagine you have you're dating the entire world, so to speak. And so it'll make it easier for you. And then those businesses will do quite well. Because then you can opt into what those things you want to be advertised, not advertised, and so that sort of stuff. So they'll still make income like they do. And you still make income in a new way that you hadn't before. So there's one example of what business can do. The other ideas from business are not jumping completely into my head yet. The other one is to create a new kind of a business. We call it trans institution. A trans institution, like the word would sound, it's an institution that cuts across other institutions. So on the board of directors, you'd have some from business, some from government, some from NGOs and so forth, a mix. And that, so you'd have a trans institution for anything. And the money would come from all those different categories because they're selling and so forth. And the value added would go to those categories. Now, the advantage of a trans-institutional business, so to speak, is that a business can't do everything as a business. That's why sometimes they set up nonprofits, or then they have a private partnership with the government and so forth. But a trans institution can go anywhere, do anything, because it goes through the government part when it wants to do government. It goes through the business part when it wants to do it. But the same thing, but they're acting in coordination because they got a board of directors, right? So they're acting coherently. So the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. So if you have a lot of businesses that are trans institutions, they'll be more efficient. My evidence is the Millennium Project. We are organized as a trans institution. Now, a trans institution has no legal personhood. It doesn't exist. It's an idea. So we're legally a nonprofit organization, but we're composed of these 67 nodes around the world, and some of them are businesses and some of them are governments. They're different things. So as a whole, we are a trans institution. And when we've been evaluated before, people are shocked to figure out how you get all this stuff done, and with budget is not the millions and millions and millions of dollars. I say it's very simple. We're a trans institution. It's going to be an efficient new way of running a business.
How many of those kind of structures exist?
Well, I, as far as I know, we're as close to a trans institution as anybody else. And we're not a perfect trans institution. The idea is that you don't have a majority of anything. You know, and which is pretty much the case with us, but it's not perfect. You have some public-private partnerships that are approaching that, but the difference with a public-private part is not necessarily an entity itself. It's not a business as such. It's an arrangement for business and government to do some collaboration. And they meet once a week and have some wine and, you know, pat each other on the back. We almost had Germany is going to introduce a bill to create a trans institution as a legal entity. So you got for-profit law, you got non-profit law, and you have constitutional law. Well, we don't have that third one. So Germany was going to do it, but then they don't try to trust the Americans. They hired the guy away. So the guy we were working with was gone. I didn't want to start all over. It's too difficult. Switzerland was also going to do it, but then that person left. You know, I maintain we can really take over a country if they would just stand still, but they don't. People keep changing all the time. Very annoying. But it's I don't know. So there's no status. There's no. Maybe your country could be the first.
It's fascinating.
If you do it, we'll register the Millennium Project as a trans institution. You just take a look at your law. Here's profit law, your non-profit. What are the rules? Okay, what would be the rules for this? And an example of the rules is you have to have income from all those categories, but not a majority of any one. You've got to have an annual report that shows value to all those categories, but not a majority of any one. That the people who do the work, the research or whatever you're doing, the sellings or whatever, has to come from all those categories, but not a majority of any one. So you do that, you're a trans institution.
It's an incredible structure going into this future that we're talking about with collaboration, cohesion, value, self-actualization. It's got to pop up as a formal structure at some point. So I read somewhere in one of your reports that changing the status of women would help improve the human condition. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, the evidence is pretty strong around the world. One of the first, quote, third world countries to go into first world status was the one that had the most women equitable relations, and that was Barbados. So there's like an empirical piece of evidence there. Women, as a generalization, when income goes up, it goes into better nutrition and better education opportunities for the children. So if you have more women involved in it, then you're helping the next generation. You get a twofer. She gets a better deal, but then does the family. If the family's got a better deal, well, then that ricochets through the whole society. We know in UN peacekeeping research that when you have women involved in the peacekeeping forces, you have a better result of maintaining the peace. So there's a variety of studies that, I mean, after all, imagine you going through life with just one arm and one leg and one eye and one nostril. You'd like to have two hands. It makes life easier. You can still live with one. The men in charge, you can still live. But it's nicer to have a balance or a synergy. There's this term synergy, right? It's the idea that the relationship between two things makes a better result. Bucky Fuller, by the way, used the example people forget. He said you take a box and you take a wheel. You put a wheel in a box, you don't get much. Take the wheel out of the box, put it underneath the box, you get a wheelbarrow. Well, you get to do a lot of work. So it's a relationship that matters. So and that's also what this. So it's not just men and women together. It's a relationship rather than men and women together. If it's a good relationship, obviously, love produces a better result than a hatred of fight between two. Clear.
So, you must at some point, looking at all this research, go, all this makes common sense. It's logical that we should be, as humans, acting in such a way that we should have had more equity, being more equitable by now, that we should have reduced certain challenges to nothing. What do you think is what's really holding us back from doing what we have the resources to do? We're an intelligent species.
I wrote a book on that about over 30 years ago called Future Mind. It was just my view. May not be right, but my reasoning was, I tried to answer, I asked exactly that question. And my answer was prejudice. And I'm not talking about race prejudice or age prejudice, but prejudging the future, prejudging the future. If you have a pink dress, you therefore think this way. That's prejudging the future. That's prejudice. It's a form of prejudice. And you see these blocks just all over the place based upon prejudice. I'm not going to hire you because you're a different tribe than I am. That's prejudice. It's just everywhere, just different prejudging the future, right? So I said, okay, what is the biggest prejudice throughout all time? And if we can resolve that one, maybe the other ones will fall away. So I concluded that the prejudice was between the mystic-oriented and the technocratic-oriented. By mystic, I'm not talking about religion here, because you can be an atheist, in my view, and still be a mystic. You can go through history. Someone called a mystic poet, and they don't necessarily believe in some guy up in the clouds. Yes. Okay. So, but mystic, I was defining as someone whose first response to a problem was to share consciousness. We will improve the world if we get better education, if we understand things better, if we collaborate, respect each other, et cetera, et cetera. That's a mystic-oriented attitude. The technocrat says, no, we'll make an AI avatar. We will have these new rules. We'll have trans institutions and all that sort of stuff. And if you think about conversations throughout the past, when, sitting around this guy, how do we do it? Some people say, it's improve the mind, the consciousness. No, you change the law. The policy is going to do it. When the answer is to do both of them. Imagine a little baby falls down. The mystic attitude would be caress the baby. Share consciousness, right? And the technocrat is clean out the thing, get the Band-Aid on there. Okay, there's no reason you can't caress and put a Band-Aid on at the same time. When great performances, music performances, let's say a piano performance, interviewed on some show like yours, saying, what happened last night? It was an incredible performance. He said, well, my hands, the piano, my mind, the composer, the notes, all seem to come into one. Yeah, that's conscious technology. When the distinction between consciousness and technology is blurred, you've gone into another stage, in a sense. You've gone beyond. Is a human being a technology or a consciousness? You got it together. Right? I mean, that's one thing most people do have together. They got it together that they're a body and a mind. They got that. Philosophers have a hard time arguing about it, but we got it. All right. So part of the idea was to create a myth that such a merger of consciousness and technology was possible, because I concluded that people couldn't live without myth. I'd like to see that, but I concluded that that's not likely to happen I couldn't see how to do it without myth. So then the question comes up, well, how do you make a myth or a narrative, as you were talking about before, that works? Okay, well then now the interesting thing is we're moving in that direction, because take a look. Is this instrument you're using right now technology or consciousness? Increasingly, our tools will be able to talk to us and understand us. Our tools will seem to become more conscious. We will have intelligent clothing. It'll say, hey, you didn't take your blood pressure pill. I can tell it's building up, etc. You laugh. The day will come when your clothes talk to you, and you'll remember this conversation. I remember in that book, I said, 30 years or 40 years ago, people will be walking down the street talking to themselves, and then no one will be crazy. It's because they'll have portable telecommunication systems on their body. So we now take it, forget it. We do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to answer your question simply, I would say prejudice, prejudging the future. And the largest prejudice between the mystic-oriented, or the consciousness sharers, and the technocrat or technocrat-oriented. And if we can make a merge of those things with our new product development and other sort of stuff. So imagine you make a technology that enhances consciousness. With an enhanced consciousness, you're making better tools. Right? I mean, was Steve Jobs a mystic or a technocrat? A little bit of both. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. He may have been grumpy and hard to work with, but he was also putting the other things together.
So we're actually in the hands of the people developing the technology, because if we have conscious beings with a global consciousness and ethics built in, collaborating for the greater good, the technology is going to be built in that way.
Right.
And then we'll have more conscious technology. So when these machines start doing their own thing, it will come with a conscious mind. So it's human beings needing to be more conscious, our machines needing to be more conscious, and a overlap of the two.
And many of it may be merging. It's the old story: if you can't beat them, join them. So if the AI evolves independent of us, then that's another part that could become a problem. I got this wristwatch in, which is ridiculous. I don't need that because I'm looking at a clock right in front of me, but it's a habit. It's part of my body, right?
Yeah.
If we can do more merger on this sort of stuff, there's approaches. There's several contact lenses now that are internet connected. There's even one I just saw the other night for Zoom Vision. It's 1 to 3 Zoom that you can do on your contact lenses. Now, Elon Musk wants to put it in your brain. I would rather put it on my head rather than in. But nevertheless, there's a lot of stuff going on right now that is increasingly merging the stuff of mind and technology. It's increasingly, that's a pretty clear trend.
So from how you see it in all these different groupings that can impact our future. So from the individual who can literally create weapons of mass destruction, to the family, to business, to huge mega corporates, to government, where's the greatest power lay in terms of our future? Which of these, I understand we need to collaborate, but which group potentially could swing the balance?
Okay, this is one of my minor complaints against journalism. It's always asking what's the most important, what's the da-da-da-da, what's the da-da. Okay, I'll make you a deal. I'll answer the question if you can answer my question. Which is more important, your brain or your heart?
Sure.
Okay. We can't exist.
Both.
We need them. We meet them both. All right.
Exactly.
So there's a whole bunch. Like, for example, I said the artists. The artists are extremely important. Well, so are the business development people.
Yeah.
So are political leaders. I mean, How much better would the world be if we had enlightened leadership in every country in the world? That by itself, you know? So they're all important. They really are. And also there's such a thing as inventing power too. For example, are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right-handed.
Okay, you're right. You're right. No, I'm not looking at you. Your right-handed was the one that just moved?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So put the right hand just a little bit above so I can see it in the screen there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Now put it back down. And I apologize, but that's what power is. You tell people what to do and they do it. So you can invent power. So I just invented some power. I mean, just pure invention. I mean, there's not a thing in nature somewhere that says this is power. You know, it's an invention. Now, the original organization of power was religion. And then along came the nation state. Remember, there's a famous painting of Napoleon when he has this crown. I don't know if you remember this painting, where the head religious leader has got this pillow and a crown's on, and starting to go like this to crown the Napoleon. He says, "Baloney, you don't crown me." He takes it out of his hand, stuck it on his own head. That's symbolically that transition. Now that religion's still there, but you're building new power on top of it. So you're inventing. I mean, a nation state is an invention. You know, there's not a genetic code for a nation state. So boom. And now the corporations are now having more power. They can have an argument with Australia about newspapers and so forth, right? You saw it. And then eventually individuals will be inventing power beyond the corporation. Each one, religion cannot change much. You go back 1,000 years, religion's eventually the same. Governments can change, but not necessarily the location, unless they get aggressive and have wars. And then corporations can change their activity and their location. Individuals can do all of the above. They can change everything all the time, and they can use different parts all the time. So we haven't gotten to this new power yet. So we're just in this transition from government to business power, and that's the conflict. I mean, you'll see that it's like adolescent teenagers are pimples and then arguing with the parents. It's transition times are tough. We're in that transition time right now. But eventually it'll sort it out. These are things the government does, and these are things that business does. We're still arguing about that at the moment.
What's coming through very strong is this enlightened. It's this beautiful interplay of everyone having a part in this, or a piece of the puzzle that they need to play their part. And if we all play nicely, if we can turn the ship around and really have an amazing ride. So
we'll turn this ship into a wonderful drones and fly around the earth.
And just have fun with music blasting all over the show and everybody doing what they love to do rather than what they have to do. It sounds like a flippin' heaven on earth.
Well, that's what people, that's what all the poetry, not all the poetry, a lot of poetry is depressing. Anyway, yeah, but that is the direction we're going so far. I mean, we do a thing called a State of the Future Index, where we take a whole bunch of variables and look at what they were over the last 20 years and project out 10 years and then see what's possible and that sort of stuff. And basically the answer to the State of the Future Index of the world is we're winning more than we're losing. Where we're losing is very deadly serious, but we're winning more than we're losing, which means you have no right to be pessimistic, but you got no right to go to sleep either.
Stay awake. The ride is about to get much more interesting.
That seems to be the case.
2 more questions. You've had such an interesting, fascinating ride yourself over the last few decades. I had to chip down your resume into that because it was like that. What would you say is your most cherished success? One of them, at least.
Okay. I would say, one of them was I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi. Persona non grata in South Africa. As all Peace Corps, it wasn't me personally, but all Peace Corps weren't allowed. We were considered the enemy. And I set up a leprosy program for the entire country with no budget. And furthermore, no real permission. And I found out later I was almost kicked out of the country. I didn't know it. Hey, who the hell does he think he is? I was doing TB. So I just basically told people they were TB leprosy people, and I would teach them what to do and created a paper system. We had people handing out pills who were like school teachers and the court masters, and we just created a whole system for no budget. And last year I was having a drink at a little conference, and the guys who said he did a survey, and he said, boy, that I couldn't believe how much the leprosy went down in Malawi. And I stood there and says, you mean, oh no, I explained this. He said, now I know why it went down so quickly in Malawi compared to Mozambique and South Africa and Zimbabwe and so forth. Because we created a national program. I would say that was one of the ones cool, because to show you that you can do stuff without money. I mean, it's cool to have money. I'm not knocking that. You send me a check, I'm happy to cash it. But the program had no budget, and it had no real authority. I sort of like well, Peace Corps are supposed to invent stuff, so I took that literally. I would say that would be one. Another one was the FOBs, even though we are now got Space Force, and I sort of like lost the overall argument. But that was very cool. I mean, putting something in naming the Enterprise was sort of fun. The space shuttle, first space shuttle was the Enterprise. That was, by the way, that was a purpose. The idea was to get the Star Trek people and science fiction fans to become a lobby for NASA. NASA didn't have a lobby. I mean, everybody's got a lobby, but space didn't have much of a lobby. It just didn't exist. So I took a piece out of the Egyptian history where you took the upper Egypt and lower Egypt, you put together the objects and the chair, and you just clump them together. So I said, okay, what's the number one image of science fiction at the time? The Enterprise, and from Star Trek. And what was the number one thing from NASA? The space shuttle. Well, it's pretty simple. We'll name the first space shuttle Enterprise. That takes care of it.
Obvious.
Yeah, obvious, right? but I had a stack, a file, a stack this thick of all the stuff that I had to do to get that done. I mean, a simple act. Good Lord, trying to tell a president of the United States what to do is a difficult job.
Oh, you've had so much fun. That's really incredible. So we know who to nominate when we're in a cashless society, and we have to figure out how to do things without money.
Well, let's figure out how to do the transition before, because if we get to that point without preparation, then we're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I mean, that's why we're doing these reports now.
Well, exactly. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing.
Welcome.
Just one other thought that came to mind when I was going through. I mean, the work is incredible. The information is mind-blowing, and the work that goes into it is incredible. At the moment, how are you as an organization winning in having the right people reading the stuff and implementing it enough, or do we still need to do a little bit of work there to get the right people to do what they need to do?
Yeah, we still need a little bit of work. That's why I'm on this show. Right?
Yeah.
We had a closer relationship with a previous some of the previous UN Secretary Generals. Would read our stuff. I don't know if they still read it or not, but I used to like hand deliver it up in the 8th floor or whatever, the 28th floor or whatever the number floor was. And it's hit or miss. It's a very complex decision-making system of the world. And it's not just UN and nation states. It's also thought leaders. But our stuff is increasingly. I mean, I won't name names, but I just got an order for our methodologies. We got a large methodology series, 37 methods, from one of the key people in the European Commission, who bought it on her own credit card. So it wasn't clear, So I did background check, and so that's who it is. A lot of times they're embarrassed to say they're buying something. It's irregular. That's why we still do interviews like this and so forth. And the work is as you can guess, so demanding. We don't get around to the public. We don't have a public relations department. We don't have a public relations person. Just doing this stuff just totally consumes everything.
Crucial info. I mean, the work you're doing is incredible. And I mean, I just saw that, geez, every business leader should have these reports at hand.
Well, a lot of business leaders do. I mean, they use it for their strategic planning process.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, they'll do their own stuff. But it's like, have we considered this in our plan? So they use it as a completeness thing to prove what they're doing. Yeah.
Final question. If you could share with us a message about the future that could enlighten us a little bit about how it is that we could be going into the future, because like we've said, every single person has a part. What message could you share with us in terms of how we can help to shape the future?
If you don't think it's possible, you won't try. And what is possible is being changed more rapidly than people realize, for a whole string of reasons, which is another television show all by itself. But when someone says impossible, don't let them get in the way. I mean, what great contributions have pessimists made anyway? Yeah, that would be it. Yeah. It's
possible. Thank you. This has been a really enlightening, fun, and amazing discussion. And
good. I enjoy it too.
Millions more people need to get to know of the kind of work that you're doing, so that we can together create this ride that could be quite amazing. So thank you for the work that you are doing. Thank you for putting this organization together, and continue doing what you're doing. We sure need the information coming from your organization. So thank you, Jerome, and thank you for the time.
Thank you.
And to everyone watching, listening, you've heard it. It's possible. What the common thread through all of this is every single one of us has a part to play in creating our future. And let's collaborate, let's be conscious, let's be awake, let's understand that it is totally possible and in our hands to drive the future forward. Thank you for being a part of the show, and till next time, lots of love.
Thank you.